Welcome to Volume 4 of the Video Guide to British Birds. This new edition includes more moving footage than ever before and a brand new commentary written specially to fit the pictures and sound recordings. The net result is a complete guide to bird identification, explained in a way impossible with any other medium. This tape covers British species in systematic order, starting with larks and ending with flycatchers. It therefore includes a range of land birds from the tiniest goldcrests to the larger thrushes, covering birds in between such as larks, pipits, wagtails, and those troublesome warblers whose songs can hold the key to identification. Also included here are birds which take insects in flight, such as swallows and flycatchers. For a detailed list of contents, please refer to the card that comes with each tape. Notice that each species is given a reference number, corresponding to the one shown here. This number tells you the overall length of the bird in centimetres, from the tip of its bill to the end of its tail. The names shown on the screen are those recommended for international use by the British Ornithologists' Union. In the commentary, however, I've continued to use the traditional names, more familiar to most British birdwatchers. The clear and detailed illustrations by Alan Harris show the different plumages of each species at rest and in flight. The commentary concentrates on how to identify each species in the field, pointing out features which can be seen and heard as you view the footage of each bird. In trying to describe the rich variety of bird calls and song, I've often resorted to making my own imitations of these sounds. These are usually hopelessly unlike the real thing, but I hope you'll still find them useful. Think of them as translations of natural bird sounds into noises which any human, even me, can imitate and remember. The distribution of each species is shown by on-screen maps. Green shows areas where the species is present throughout the year, yellow shows where it is only found in summer, and blue shows the areas visited in winter. The distribution of very rare visitors is shown in grey. Now, let's begin this volume with horned lark. To many birdwatchers, this bird is known as the shore lark, since in Britain it is found almost exclusively at coastal sites. Each spring, however, it returns to its Arctic breeding habitat of mountain tops and tundra. In all plumages, shore larks can be identified by their black and yellow face pattern, which is particularly bold in adult birds. The dark, virtually black tail is another useful feature, especially in flight. Listen out for their light, clear call, which sounds like silly-oo, silly-oo. Shore larks are scarce visitors, which can be found in winter at a few favoured sites, such as the edges of shingle beaches or salt marshes. Skylark. Many people have never had a good look at a skylark, but almost everyone is familiar with its continuous torrent of song, which enlivens many a springtime walk in the British countryside. Usually it is seen as just a hovering speck in the sky, but with patience you may see that it is a classic small streaky brown bird. Notice though that it doesn't have the conical bill of a finch or bunting, and it is too bulky to be a pipit. This white feather on the outer edge of the tail is a feature of many small birds, but only the skylark has an additional white line along the trailing edge of each wing, clearly visible in flight. Apart from the spectacular song, the skylark also produces a weak, dribbly flight call. Skylarks are still common birds in open country throughout Britain, but they have declined noticeably in the last 20 years. They tend to leave upland areas in winter, especially in cold weather, when they make obvious temporary migrations. Woodlark. The woodlark is a rare bird in Britain, most likely to be located by its delightful song, but often extremely confiding if you do happen to find one. Compared to the much commoner skylark, it is smaller, with a strikingly short tail. Notice how the obvious pale eye stripes continue over the reddish ear coverts and meet at the back of the crown. A little black and white patch at the bend of the wing is also diagnostic. Listen for its sweet, clear song, with a distinctive, lilting, almost yodeling rhythm, most appropriate for a bird which spirals round in circles as it sings. The call is a soft, liquid silhouette, silhouette, easily remembered as silly twit. Woodlarks are scarce summer migrants, only likely to be found on the partly wooded heaths of East Anglia and southern England. Sand martin. The sand martin is the smallest, most lightly built member of the martin family, and the only one which doesn't build a nest. Instead, it excavates holes in sandbanks, creating small, busy colonies. They are easily identified because they are the only martins which look brown in flight rather than black. They don't have the white rump of a house martin or the long-tailed streamers of a swallow. At close range you can see a diagnostic brown band across their chest. The sand martin call is a soft chirruping, often delivered as a constant buzzing chorus around their colonies. Sand martins are most often seen flying around over wetland areas, especially gravel pits or rivers, where there are likely to be suitable sandbanks for breeding. Their distribution throughout Britain is now rather patchy due to spectacular population crashes in 1969 and 1984. Swallow. One swallow certainly doesn't make a summer, since a few birds often arrive in Britain before the end of March, when there is still a prospect of blizzards. Nevertheless, they represent a welcome sign that summer is at least imminent. Swallows are rather slimmer and more elegant than the martins, a feature exaggerated by the long-tailed streamers of the adults. Their wonderfully agile but graceful flight is captured here in slow motion. Their calls are sweeter and more swittery than the martins. Swallows are widespread and abundant summer visitors, except in large towns and at high altitudes. House martin. House martins are familiar to many people, thanks to their habit of nesting in colonies in towns and villages. It is therefore easy to admire their impressive domed nests of mud and saliva, though perhaps not the piles of droppings which build up below. House martins are virtually black above and white below, but easily identified by their obvious rectangular white rump patches. Their call is more chirrupy than that of a swallow, and less subdued than the call of a sand martin. House martins are widespread summer visitors throughout Britain, although they become generally more scarce the further north you go. Tree pipit. If you see a small brown bird with heavily streaked underparts and a fine pointed bill, it will almost certainly be a pipit, but beyond that, identification can be tricky unless you know their calls. To sort out a silent tree pipit, notice that the eye stripe and moustachial stripe are both obvious, giving the whole head a stripier look than a meadow pipit. Also, look for this line of dark feathers near the bend of the wing, more conspicuous on a tree pipit. Lastly, and most convincingly, see how the thick dark streaks on the breast become much narrower down by the flanks. Tree pipit song is bolder and more elaborate than a meadow pipit, involving a variety of repeated phrases within each performance. The song is often started whilst flying upwards, then continues as the bird spirals back down. The call is even more distinctive, a harsh, piercing tees, tees. Tree pipits occur in summer in most parts of Britain, but have declined markedly throughout lowland England. In their strongholds of North and West Britain, they usually prefer areas of scattered trees, but don't be surprised to find them on the ground nearby. Meadow pipit. This is by far the commonest pipit. Indeed, in many areas of open country, it will be the most numerous bird of all. At rest, it is best identified by the way the thick black streaks on the underparts continue all the way down the flanks almost to the undertail. Notice too that the head pattern is duller and generally darker, so the eye seems to be surrounded by a pale ring rather than a clear stripe. If in doubt, you may need to hear its call, a soft sip sip, sip sip sip. Its simple song, performed only during the downward part of its song flight, is a monotonous, accelerating repetition of these same notes. Meadow pipits occur in most parts of Britain, but their numbers vary greatly, from superabundant in most upland areas to scarce and local in lowland England. They are birds of open, grassy areas, rarely perching in trees. Rock pipit. The rock pipit and water pipit share so many features that until recently they were regarded as one species. Even now birdwatchers struggle to identify them with confidence, so they are often described using the collective name of spinoletta pipits. Both species are bulkier than the meadow pipit, with longer, heavier bills, black legs and more diffuse streaking on the breast. The rock pipit though is much darker in tone, with dull buff instead of white outer tail feathers, and no obvious eye stripe. The call and song of the rock pipit both resemble the sounds of meadow pipits, but they are always more hoarse and strident. Rock pipits are primarily birds of rocky coasts all around Britain, where they remain throughout the year. Some birds, however, spread to less typical coastal habitats in winter, when others occasionally turn up far inland. Water pipit. The water pipit is primarily a bird of mountain regions, such as the Pyrenees and Alps. However, it is frequently recorded in Britain as a passage visitor, with small numbers wintering here. In winter, water pipits could be mistaken for meadow pipits, but notice that the bill is heftier, the legs are black, and the markings are more diffuse. The greyer plumage, and especially the obvious eye stripe, separates this species from both the meadow pipit and the much darker rock pipit. Their songs and calls are very similar to those of rock pipit, but the call is a little shorter, less emphatic. Water pipits are scarce visitors, but could turn up almost anywhere in England, especially during spring or autumn migrations. In winter, they usually occur inland, mostly at wetland sites such as marshes, rivers, sewage farms and watercress beds. Sometimes several birds may occur together and roost communally. Grey wagtail. The conspicuous yellow on the breast, and especially around the tail of a grey wagtail, causes many novice birdwatchers to think they must have seen a yellow wagtail. However, if it's in winter, and especially if it's by a stream, then it will certainly be a grey wagtail. To identify one for certain, you should look at its back. Grey on a grey wagtail, yellowy brown on a yellow wagtail. Grey wagtails have a much longer, more black and white tail, and show a broad, pale wing bar as they fly over. The male in summer develops a bold face pattern with white stripes and a jet black bib. Their loud flight call most closely resembles that of a pied wagtail, but is harder, more abrupt and more metallic. The grey wagtail is essentially a bird of fast-flowing streams throughout the north and west of Britain, but it is spreading through lowland England by using sites such as weirs and reservoir outflows, where fast, shallow water is created artificially. It is not uncommon to see them in towns and other urban areas, especially in winter. Yellow wagtail. The yellow wagtail is shorter-tailed and more pipit-like than the other wagtails, and the only one which doesn't stay in Britain for the winter. The adult male in spring is an unmistakable canary yellow from head to tail, though somewhat browner on his back. Females are browner on the head, but still show plenty of yellow on the underparts. Juveniles are usually more of a buffy brown colour, sometimes almost white below, with perhaps just a hint of yellow. With luck, you may find one of the other races of yellow wagtail, descriptively called blue-headed or grey-headed wagtails, which are typical in other parts of Europe. They have a distinctive call, a rising sweet, runnier than in other wagtails. Yellow wagtails are birds of summer meadows, especially cattle-grazed pastures in lowland England. They are absent from most of Wales and Scotland and are very much on the decline. Pied wagtail. The pied wagtail is a truly British bird, being quite different in appearance from the white wagtail which breeds throughout Europe but rarely does so here. Sadly, the two populations do interbreed, especially in Holland, so they have to be considered races of the same species. The pied wagtail has a distinctive black and white plumage pattern and shows the typical tail-bobbing action of all wagtails. Its back is black in a male, dark grey in a female, but never storm cloud grey as in a white wagtail. To memorise the disyllabic call of the pied wagtail, just think of this bird as the Chiswick flyover. Pied wagtails occur commonly throughout Britain, although they are apparently becoming scarcer in lowland England. They are likely to be found in almost any open habitat, from farmland to towns. White wagtails occur mostly as passage visitors, especially in spring in western Britain. Waxwing. About once in every 10 years, British birdwatchers are treated to what are called waxwing years, when flocks of these delightful birds arrive from Scandinavia to grace our hedgerows, parks and gardens, gobbling up every berry in sight. Even non-bird watchers get excited about these distinctive, colourful and famously approachable birds. They usually offer ample opportunity to appreciate their sandy plumage with a full crest, black bib, yellow tips to the tail feathers and white markings in the wings. Even the little red waxy tips to the secondaries can often be seen, longer and more numerous in the adult males. Their distinctive trilling call has been likened to the sound of blowing a broken whistle with a pea in it. If you hear this, you know you've found something good. Waxwings occur almost every year in Scotland and on the east coast, but in a good year they can turn up anywhere. Their desire for berries often brings them into parks and ornamental gardens, so be sure you have a cotoneaster bush waiting for them in your garden. Dippers. Why are dippers called dippers? Is it because they are constantly dipping in and out of the water in search of food? Or perhaps because they dip up and down when standing beside a stream? They are very distinctive birds, like big fat wrens, dark brown, almost black, with a huge white baby's bib covering their breast. In juvenile birds, the pale front is obscured by scaly grey blotches during late summer. Look carefully and you'll see their white eyelids as they blink at regular intervals. Dippers usually announce their presence with their ch-ch calls, especially as they fly up or down the river. The song is a crazy, halting jumble of typical calls mixed with squeaks, clicks and warbles. Dippers are entirely restricted to fast-flowing rivers and streams, so they only occur in upland areas of North and West Britain. Wren. The wren, along with the chaffinch and blackbird, is one of the 3 commonest breeding birds in Britain. Indeed, if their population goes several years without being hit by severe winter weather, it may briefly become the commonest. Wrens are familiar birds, with rich brown finely barred plumage, a tiny fat body and a spiky tail always held cocked up. Their enthusiastic song is astonishingly loud for such a tiny bird. A bravado performance, prolonged, high-pitched and full of churs and machine-gun-like rattles. Their stuttering calls are also distinctive. Wrens occur throughout the British Isles, although they generally get less abundant the further north you go. They seem happy wherever there is vegetative undergrowth, from moorland gullies to suburban gardens, but especially in woodlands and hedgerows. Dunnock. The dunnock, or hedge accentor, is probably most people's idea of a boring brown bird, but close studies have revealed that it has an astonishing sex life. Husbands with several wives, wives with several husbands, and even wives sharing communes. Anything goes amongst dunnocks, with each bird apparently seeking promiscuity wherever possible. In plumage, it may seem rather sparrow-like, but its old name of hedge sparrow was misleading. Its slim build, and especially its fine pointed bill, prove that this isn't a sparrow at all. Key identification features include rich brown upper parts, neatly streaked with black, bright orange or pinkish legs, and above all, the lead-grey colouring of the head and breast. Its call is short and thin, but shrill and piercing. Its song is a brief, high-pitched, rather monotonous warble, a welcome, cheery sound in early spring. Dunnocks occur throughout Britain and are common everywhere except in upland areas. They frequently visit gardens, but their favoured habitats are woodlands, scrub and hedgerows. Robin. Of all our garden birds, the robin is perhaps the most popular, not only because of the splash of colour its red breast brings to a dull winter's day, but also because it can be so fearlessly tame, willing even to hop onto your hand or into your home. The red breast, of course, makes identification easy, but it can be told even in silhouette or in its blotchy brown juvenile plumage by its plump shape, upright stance and habit of making abrupt bowing movements. Their tick-tick calls are distinctive, especially when repeated quickly, like a clockwork toy being wound up. The melancholy warbling song is also easily remembered. Tweedaloo, tweedledee, tweedaloo, tweedledee. Robins are widespread and numerous in virtually all habitats wherever there are trees. Only in the Scottish Highlands and Islands do they become more scarce. Nightingale. Despite its usually secretive habits, the nightingale has a special place in European folklore, thanks to its extraordinary, rich, powerful, melodious song. The fact that it is often delivered at night, when all else is quiet, and that the bird itself is seldom seen, adds to its charisma. When a nightingale does become visible, it is seen to be a rather disappointing plain brown bird, characterised only by whiter underparts, a richer chestnut colour on the tail, and a conspicuous large black staring eye, accentuated by a white eye ring. The song is of legendary quality, often beginning with a rising pee pee pee, then exploding into a crescendo of full rounded notes. The calls include wheat, like a willow warbler but fuller, more emphatic, and also a low rattling croak. Sadly, the sound of a nightingale is becoming increasingly rare in Britain, although about 5,000 pairs are still thought to breed. These are almost entirely restricted to south and east of a line between the Severn and the Wash, with highest densities in Kent and Essex. They are a bird of woodland and scrub, requiring dense cover and having a special liking for coppiced woods. Bluethroat. If ever you are on the east coast and you see the back of a dark brown bird disappearing into a bush or reed bed, look carefully at its tail pattern. If it has deep red patches at the base of the tail, it will be a bluethroat, so wait patiently for better views. With luck, it could be a stunningly plumaged male. The blue throat of a male is of course diagnostic. In summer, Scandinavian males have a red patch in the blue throat, but in birds from elsewhere in Europe, this patch is white. In females, the throat is mostly white, usually with no blue at all, but enclosed by a dark, blotchy band across the breast. The dark brown plumage, with a white eye stripe and white moustachial stripe, recalls a mini redwing. The tail pattern is characteristic of bluethroats of all ages, as is their furtive, run, stop and flick behaviour. Bluethroats are usually skulking birds, so it is worth learning their calls, especially a characteristic like flicking paper and a soft squelching noise, as well as the chat-like see chat chat and whistling wheep heard here. Bluethroats often sing only fragments of their song, but in full flow they produce a spectacular torrent of notes, rising and tumbling like one of the more musical warblers, but with a characteristic tinkling quality. Sadly, this is rarely heard in Britain, where the bluethroat is a scarce passage visitor, sometimes in spring, but mostly from late August to October. Bluethroats love open ground, around the base of bushes and, especially, reed beds. Redstart. Male common redstarts are delightfully gaudy birds, especially when flashing their red tails, trying to attract their partner to a potential nest site. The eye-catching red tail separates the redstart from all other small birds except the darker, duller black redstart. Even the dullest female common redstarts have a pale throat and hints of orange in their underparts, unlike black redstarts. The redstart song is a short, melancholy warble, rising like a chaffinch, but shorter and with a runny or dribbly quality. The calls consist of wheat, like a strong, insistent willow warbler, often followed by a like a chat, but less harsh. Redstarts are summer visitors, often quite numerous in the wooded valleys of Wales, Scotland and northern England. However, they have recently disappeared from many parts of lowland England, where only scattered and generally small populations remain. They frequently occur as migrants, especially in coastal areas. Black redstart. Black redstarts would normally be at home in the scenic splendour of high alpine scree slopes, but, perversely, if that's not available, they'll make do with a derelict building site in Birmingham. Black redstarts have similar quivering red tails to common redstarts, but the males are otherwise sooty grey in colour, apart from a blacker face and breast and a variable white panel in the wing. Females can be told from common redstarts because they are always duller, with uniformly dark underparts from bill to legs. The song consists of a thin, shivering warble not unlike common redstart, but usually followed by a weak, scratching sound, like scrunching a bag of marbles. The black redstart is a regular visitor, especially in autumn and winter, to many coastal sites around Britain. They sometimes breed around the coast, at docks, cliffs and power stations, but most of the British breeding population, which sometimes reaches 100 pairs, is found in town centres, gasworks, railway sidings and industrial estates scattered throughout England. Windchat. A summer visitor to Britain, windchats are most often seen sitting attractively on posts, wires or the tops of tall stalks of bracken or other vegetation. Their plump outline, upright posture and orangey underparts may be suggestive of stonechat, but in all plumages they have a broad pale eye stripe and streaky brown mantle more reminiscent of a sedge warbler. Windchats also have pale white patches at the base of the tail, which are diagnostic but hard to see. Their song consists of varied, abrupt, stuttery phrases, often interspersed with squeaky additions. Their call is a yee-chack-chack, like other chats but softer, less penetrating. The windchat is a bird of open country, dominated by grasses or bracken, or sometimes heather or gorse. They are found most commonly in upland parts of Scotland, Wales and northern England, but they have declined drastically and even disappeared from many parts of lowland England. Stonechat. Where there are patches of gorse in coastal areas, the stonechat is often one of the commonest birds. Male stonechats, especially in spring, are unmistakable, with their tricoloured plumage, black heads, orange breasts and big white blobs of white on the sides of the neck. The same pattern can just about be seen on females and juveniles, but they are brown, not black, on the head and upper parts, and the orange and white areas are much less pronounced. Some such birds may resemble windchats, but they have fatter bodies, shorter wings and longer tails, and above all they have no eye stripe to break up their generally dark heads. Their call is more grating than in most other chats, and their short scratchy song is simpler, less varied than that of the windchat, recalling an unenthusiastic whitethroat or perhaps a truncated dunnock. Stonechats occur mostly in areas of heath, especially where gorse is abundant. They have disappeared from many of the inland areas where they used to breed, and are now more restricted to coastal areas, especially in western Britain and Ireland. In winter, they occur in most parts of Britain, but are much less common inland. Wheatear. It is said that the name wheatear derives from the expression white arse, a perfect description of how this bird appears as it flies away. Indeed, it is the white rump, contrasting with the inverted black T in the tail, which separates a wheatear in any plumage from all other British birds. Males in spring are handsome birds, with blue-grey backs and black eye masks. Females and first winter birds are brown above, and usually lack the dark eye patch. The song starts off as a spirited whistling warble, but as it accelerates the male's voice breaks and grinds embarrassingly to a halt with the sound of stones being rolled together. The call is typically chat-like. Wheatears are summer visitors, breeding in bare, grassy or rocky areas in upland or coastal parts of Britain, and occurring commonly as passage migrants, especially on the coast. Ring-ouzel. There is something haunting about the melancholy song of a ring-ouzel, echoing in a moorland clough on a cold grey day. The end of March seems much too early for a summer visitor to arrive in these bleak, desolate places. The ring-ouzel is adequately described as being like a blackbird but with a broad white band across its breast. In females, the breastband is duller and the plumage is browner. Juveniles lack the breastband but are obviously scaly underneath, often with some white in the throat. Grey edges to the wing feathers make the wings paler than the body in all plumages. Worth remembering if you see a bird flying away. The flight call is more reminiscent of fieldfare than blackbird. The song is usually repetitive like a song thrush, but lacks gusto, and is particularly plaintive, more like a song thrush. Although passage migrants can turn up anywhere, especially on the coasts, ring-ouzels are most often seen in their breeding haunts, rocky cloughs, gullies, outcrops and quarries, usually more than 250 metres above sea level. Blackbird. The blackbird is familiar to just about everyone in Britain, and so it should be, since it is arguably our most widespread species, and certainly one of the three commonest. The all-black male, with his bright yellow bill, is unmistakable, and the female is distinctively dark brown all over, with only obscure streaking on the breast. The blackbird's song is full, rich and melodious, more elaborate and much deeper than the missel thrush, as if singing from the lungs, not just the mouth. Their scolding, tutting calls, produced either singly or in dramatic rapid volleys, are familiar sounds in woodlands, parks and gardens, and often indicate the presence of a cat or an owl. Blackbirds are very numerous, especially in England, virtually wherever there are trees, although densities are usually very low on high moorlands or windswept islands. Fieldfare. The fieldfare is most familiar as a common passage and winter visitor, although you may be lucky enough to find one of the few breeding pairs, which occur almost randomly at scattered sites in northern Britain. Fieldfares are easily identified. They are almost as big as a missel thrush, but their darker, reddish-brown backs are sandwiched between the striking cold grey colours of the head and rump. In flight, the conspicuously white underwing coverts could cause confusion with missel thrush, but if you can't see the grey head and rump, look for a clear contrast between the white lower belly and the black tail. Fieldfares have characteristic harsh, chattering, chacking calls. Their song is a weak, wheezy warble, a bit pathetic for a thrush. Fieldfares are widespread and numerous passage and winter visitors, feeding in fields or on berry-laden bushes, and resorting to towns, parks and many gardens during harsh weather. Summer sightings tend to be in hilly areas, either in moorland cloughs or small plantations. Redwing. Redwings are mostly winter visitors to Britain, and their arrival, usually during October, is announced by their thin calls, piercing the night air as they migrate low overhead. They most closely resemble song thrushes, but are best identified by the obvious buff stripes over the eye and through the moustache. These features are often more obvious than the red flanks and red underwing which give the bird its name. The redwing call, a drawn-out, thin "seep," is often heard and easily learned. The song, however, is less familiar and confusingly variable. It consists of a short, strong warble, sometimes like a slow willow warbler, usually followed by a volley of fast, subdued, scratchy notes like the subsong of a whitethroat. Redwings are abundant in winter, usually in fields, hedgerows and scrubland, but venturing fearlessly into towns and gardens in harsh weather. There is also a small breeding population in the Highlands of Scotland, where numbers fluctuate from year to year with an average of about 50 pairs. Song thrush. The song thrush is familiar as a regular visitor to many gardens and as a delightful songster. Its brown plumage and speckled chest is typical of a thrush. It lacks the white tips to the corners of the tail and the white edges to many of the wing feathers shown by a missel thrush. Notice here that the underwing coverts are clearly orange, not as deep and red as in a redwing, but still a potential source of confusion. The song thrush song is loud, clear, musical and characteristically repetitive. Each phrase is given several times before switching to a different phrase. The song thrush is a widespread bird of woods, parks, gardens and hedgerows, common throughout Britain but most numerous in southeast England. Missel thrush. The missel thrush has earned itself the country name of stormcock due to its habit of singing loud and clear even on dull grey days. For example, in late winter when other birds can't be bothered. It is a big, bold, aggressive bird, larger than a blackbird and more fat-bellied, long-tailed and small-headed than other thrushes. Its upper parts are paler, more grey-brown than on a song thrush, and there are white edges to many of the wing feathers and in the corners of the tail. The face is generally paler, making the dark eye more prominent and giving a wide-eyed expression. It has an angry, rattling call. The missel thrush song lacks the repetition of a song thrush and the depth and quality of a blackbird. Instead, its brief, wistful, high-pitched phrases seem to have a carried-on-the-wind quality, if that makes sense. Missel thrushes are widespread and common throughout Britain, but they need large territories, so they are rarely numerous at any one place. They prefer areas of open woodland, especially parkland, and are least common where trees are scarce. Chetty's warbler. The Chetty's warbler can be tantalisingly difficult to see, as it belts out explosive bursts of song from the nearest bush. Unusually for a warbler, this can happen at any time of year, even in Britain. If you do get to see a Chetty's warbler, you'll notice dark reddish-brown upper parts and pale whitish underparts, highlighted only by a short, pale stripe arching over a conspicuous black eye. Its tail is both broader and longer than most other warblers. Its colour, song, habitat and skulking habits show many similarities to the nightingale, but the eye stripe makes an obvious difference. In its loud, rich song, the Chetty's is supposed to say "Chetty, Chetty," but it usually sounds more like chup, 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 with the tonal quality of a nightingale. Its calls include a sharp tut like a wren and a more rattling prut like a long-tailed tit. Chetty's warblers weren't even recorded in Britain until the 1960s, but by the late 70s there were almost 200 singing males, based mostly in Kent and Norfolk. Adverse winter weather has virtually wiped out these populations, but new strongholds have become established in Hampshire, Dorset and Devon, where over 100 males have persisted. Chetty's warblers are usually associated with marshy habitats, but spend much of their time in the nearby dense bushes. Grasshopper warbler. Is it an insect? Is it a rattlesnake? No, it's a grasshopper warbler, producing its bizarre reeling song, sometimes perched conspicuously, but usually well hidden amongst a tangle of undergrowth. If you are lucky enough to see a grasshopper warbler, you'll notice that it's a dull brown bird with streaked upper parts and a broad rounded tail which has streaks underneath. A fluffy white throat is often obvious when the bird is singing. The lack of an eye stripe eliminates sedge warbler, the only other streaky warbler. The distinctive song has been described as like a fisherman's reel being wound in. The earliest grasshopper warblers arrive in mid-April, but most are heard in May, at localities scattered throughout the British Isles. They occur mostly at lower altitudes, in sites with a thick ground cover, such as grasses, brambles or sedges. The British population has crashed spectacularly since 1971. Savvy's warbler. Just when you think you've mastered how to identify the song of a grasshopper warbler, you'll learn that there is another bird, the Savvy's warbler, which sounds almost the same. Prior to 1954, you could have been confident that any warbler in Britain with a reeling song would be a grasshopper warbler, but nowadays about a dozen Savvy's warblers are located here every year. If you see a Savvy's warbler, it should be easily separated from a grasshopper warbler by its bulky size, more obvious narrow white eye line, hardly any markings under the tail, and, above all, a complete lack of streaks in its plumage. This unstreaked appearance could lead to confusion with the reed warbler, but even a silent Savvy's can be told by its colder, duller brown plumage, bigger body, smaller rounded head and finer, less obvious bill. The neat white pencil line of an eye stripe is distinctive if visible. The sharp ticking call of the Savvy's warbler is sometimes the prelude to its song. Despite what you may read in some books, the Savvy's warbler song is lower pitched than the grasshopper warbler and given so quickly that the notes are more blurred together, sounding more like tu than the three of that species. Savvy's warblers are rare visitors to southeast England, almost invariably in Phragmites reed beds. So if you hear the reeling song of a warbler coming from a reed bed, look carefully. Sedge warbler. From mid-April onwards, reed beds, marshes and scrubby thickets all over Britain resound to the lively chattering songs of sedge warblers. They aren't difficult to identify by sight. The broad white eye stripe is much bolder than in any other warbler, and the streaked upper parts are also characteristic. A well-hidden bird, though, may have to be distinguished from a reed warbler by sound alone. Both have chattering songs, but the sedge warbler is a more interesting speaker, more animated, sometimes quiet and slow, sometimes faster and louder, sometimes shrill and excited. Classic phrases include chaka chak chak chak, sweet 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 sweet, chaka chak chak chak, chaka chak chak, sweet 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 sweet. Sedge warblers are commonest in eastern Britain, but occur in most parts of the country except on high ground. They are typically found in marshy habitats, but will also accept scrubby areas, young conifer plantations, and even fields of oilseed rape. Marsh warbler. The extraordinary song of the marsh warbler is rarely heard in Britain, since only a dozen pairs currently breed each year, most of these being in Kent. Marsh warblers are exceptionally difficult to identify by sight. Even birds in the hand can prove impossible. However, compared to a reed warbler, they should be a colder, greyer-brown tone, with longer primaries and brighter, yellower legs and feet. Their wings should be less uniform in several ways, due to a darker alula, darker centred tertials, and pale edges to the tips of the primaries. Thankfully, the song makes identification easier. It consists of a fast-flowing torrent of sounds, including imitations of lots of other birds, both European and African. It is the sheer variety and fluency of the song which is striking, and also the subdued, understated manner in which it is delivered. Marsh warblers are not necessarily confined to marshes, although the tall, dense patches of nettles, willow herbs and umbellifers which they favour are usually found in damp areas such as riversides and swamps. They don't arrive in Britain until late May, and even then only in very small numbers. Reed warbler. The reed warbler is aptly named because this is a species which is found almost exclusively in reed beds, especially those of the common reed or Phragmites. Their long, strong bill distinguishes them from just about all the typically land-based warblers, and their plain brown plumage is matched only by savies and marsh warblers. Savies warblers are a different shape, with a clearer, longer eye stripe, so that just leaves the marsh warbler. However, if your bird is in a reed bed in Britain, the chances of it being a marsh warbler are remote indeed. If the bird is warm brown, with dark legs and uniform wings, you can safely assume it's a reed warbler. The reed warbler song is most like that of a sedge warbler, chattering in a similar fashion. The reed warbler, though, is a boring, monotonous gossip, who picks up a steady rhythm and then doesn't half go on and on and on. It's as if they were grumbling. And then he said, ja-ja-ja-ja-ja-ja, and you'll never guess, ja-ja-ja-ja-ja, and did you know, ja-ja-ja-ja-ja-ja. The reed warbler is a summer visitor, mostly to those parts of England south of the Humber and Mersey. They are very rare in most of Wales and Scotland, and are almost always found in or around reed beds. Icterine warbler. It is a shame that most of the migrant icterine warblers found in Britain occur in the autumn, because if more turned up in spring, it would give lots of birders the chance to enjoy their superb songs. If you've never seen an icterine warbler, you might wonder whether you'd be able to tell one from a willow warbler. Don't worry. The plain face, staring eye, long sloping head and big pale bill make it obviously different. To separate it from the closely related melodious warbler, though, you have to look very carefully at its wings. Icterines have a pale yellow panel in the wing, and their primaries are unusually long and spaced out, not bunched up as in a melodious. Its song is loud and exceptionally varied, with phrases rolling on quickly and continuously like a reed warbler, but sometimes repeated slowly like a song thrush. It tries to sound beautiful, but many of the notes have a creaky quality. Icterine warblers are scarce, but regular migrants to many sites, mostly on the east coast of Britain from August to October, with fewer records in spring. Dartford warbler. The Dartford warbler is one of the few warblers which remain in Britain all through the year. However, this is mainly a Mediterranean species, so it is hardly surprising that its numbers crash whenever we have a harsh winter. It is much darker than other warblers and has a longer tail, often cocked up. The plumage is dark slate grey above and deep claret red below. The Dartford warbler song reminds me of a clockwork toy, which, once wound up, makes a flurry of mechanical scraping noises before coming to an abrupt halt. Their buzzing alarm call is like that of a whitethroat, but more subdued. Dartford warblers are completely confined to certain gorsy heaths in southern England, especially in Hampshire and Dorset, where up to 800 pairs have been counted. If the population isn't set back by harsh winter weather, up to 100 pairs also spread into Surrey. Lesser whitethroat. The lesser whitethroat is easily overlooked, spending most of its time hidden in dense scrubby vegetation and producing unremarkable songs and calls. As you might expect, they have white throats, but can be told from the slightly larger common whitethroat in all plumages by their plain brown, not orangey brown wings. They have darker heads than common whitethroats, creating a neater contrast with the white throat. Some birds, especially juveniles, show a dark mask through the eye. The typical call, tack, is shorter and sharper than that of other warblers. The song begins as a jumbling warble, but this is far less audible than the loud, dry, monotonous rattle which follows. Like a hard chaffinch without the final flourish. The lesser whitethroat is a widespread but generally scarce summer visitor to most of England and a few parts of Wales and Scotland. They prefer dense scrubby thickets, copses and hedgerows. Common whitethroat. The whitethroat is a chirpy character, which was until 1968 one of our commonest birds. In 1969, however, 3/4 of the population failed to return from their African quarters, where the prolonged drought had deprived them of winter food. Since then, whitethroats have undergone periods of slow recovery, followed by recurring crashes in 1984 and 1991. The clean white throat is distinctive, but not diagnostic, so you must also look for the rich, rusty red colour of its wings. The fairly long, white-edged tail is also a useful feature, as is the obvious white eye-ring, which, together with the raised crown feathers, often gives the whitethroat a startled appearance. The typical scolding call is soft, rather than the harsh tack of other heathland warblers. The song can be memorised by trying to say chup-a-chee as fast as possible about 6 times in succession. Even after the recent declines, there are still thought to be about 500,000 pairs of whitethroats found throughout Britain, except in upland areas. They are birds of hedgerows, copses, heath and scrubland, arriving in late April and departing in September. Garden warbler. Although the garden warbler looks quite different from the closely related blackcap, their songs are so similar that even the birds themselves seem to get confused. Each species has been known to respond to the other, sometimes even by mimicking them, and keeping the other species out of their territory. The garden warbler is almost strikingly nondescript. It doesn't have a black cap, or a brown cap, or a white throat, or an obvious supercilium, or a long bill, or any obvious markings on its wings, and therefore can't really be mistaken for any other warbler. What it does have is a fairly sturdy build, short but relatively thick bill, and subtle hints of grey in an otherwise dull brown plumage. Its face is characteristically plain, except for the big staring black eye, exaggerated by the faint white eye-ring. The typical song is like that of a blackcap, but much more hurried, breathless, monotonous and lacking in rhythm. In full song, the garden warbler seems to go on endlessly without a pause. You can think of it as a garbled warbler. Warblers are common summer visitors to most of England, Wales and southern Scotland. They are most frequent in deciduous woodlands with a dense understory, but they will also occupy small copses, scrubby heathlands and young conifer plantations. Blackcap. The blackcap is supposed to be a summer visitor, staying in Britain from April to October. But increasingly in the last 20 years, there have been numbers of blackcaps wintering in England, especially in gardens. These are apparently migrants from Central Europe, taking advantage of the food provided at English bird tables. The blackcap is unmistakable, thanks to the neat black cap of the male or the reddish-brown cap of the female, enlivening an otherwise dull grey body. The black-cap song is typically slower than that of a garden warbler, with fuller, richer notes, eventually produced in a steady, clear phrase to the rhythm of Duty Day, Day of Duty. A typical call is a sharp chut chut. Blackcaps are widespread and relatively numerous summer visitors to mature deciduous woodland and parkland throughout Britain except in the Scottish Highlands. Small numbers are present in winter. They are usually more abundant than the garden warbler. Wood warbler. Wood warblers offer one of the many joys of a springtime oak woodland. The displaying male will leap about from branch to branch, stopping occasionally to perform. As his loud song accelerates into an excited trill, the bird goes into a body-shaking, wing-quivering frenzy. Wood warblers are the biggest and brightest of our leaf warblers, those with small, fine beaks and greeny-yellow plumage. He can be identified by his yellower throat, gleaming white belly, broader and yellower eye stripe, and longer wings. Here you can also see the dark tertials with prominent pale edges. Apart from the glorious trills, the singing males also produce a series of melancholy piping whistles. The trill itself has been likened to the sound of a coin spinning to a halt on a marble slab. The wood warbler is a summer visitor to deciduous woodland, especially oak woods in the valleys of Wales and western Scotland. It is generally rather scarce in eastern Britain. Chiffchaff. Everyone can recognise the distinctive song of a chiffchaff as it haltingly belts out its own name, but a silent chiffchaff poses one of the trickiest problems for novice or even expert birdwatchers. The easiest way to separate chiffchaff from willow warbler is by the black legs of a chiffchaff, but this isn't always 100% reliable. If it's really a chiffchaff, it should also have relatively short wings and a rather timid facial expression, as created by a weaker eye stripe, shorter, more rounded head and shorter bill. The chiffchaff song is unmistakable, though perhaps the German name of Zilpzalp is more accurate. The call is very slightly simpler, less disyllabic than the wheat of a willow warbler. So remember, shorter name, shorter song, shorter wings, shorter bill and shorter call all identify the chiffchaff. Chiffchaffs are abundant summer visitors, mainly to areas of woodland and parkland. They are most common in the south and west of Britain, becoming quite scarce in the north, except around the coasts. Like the blackcap, small numbers of chiffchaff winter in Britain and frequently turn up in gardens. Willow warbler. The willow warbler is our commonest summer visitor, with birdwatchers awaiting each year that day in April when every bush seems to be alive with their cascading songs. Willow warblers are small, neat and greeny yellow, with a fine insect-eating bill. They are usually seen flicking around amongst the overhanging leaves of a tree or bush. Juveniles in the autumn can appear disarmingly bright yellow. The willow warbler invariably looks a stronger, bolder bird than the chiffchaff. The whole head appears to be more pointed, as if the bird is stretching forward, not skulking back. This impression is produced by the longer head, longer beak and clearer eye stripe of a willow warbler. The longer wings and pale yellowish legs should confirm the identification. Notice how the sweet, liquid song rises quickly and then dies slowly away. The call is more disyllabic than that of a chiffchaff. Willow warblers are very numerous, in virtually all habitats containing trees and bushes, from urban parks to moorland cloughs. They arrive in April and have mostly gone by early October, hardly ever occurring in winter. Goldcrest. The goldcrest shares with the firecrest the distinction of being Britain's tiniest bird. It is essentially like a small-bodied but large-headed leaf warbler, but with narrow white wing bars and a distinctive head pattern. The narrow yellow or orange stripe across the top of the crown is neatly edged with black. The pale ring around the dark eye gives the goldcrest an open-faced, staring expression. The typical call is so high-pitched that older bird watchers often become unable to hear it. The song is also high-pitched and has a lilting to and fro rhythm, rising and accelerating to a flourish with an abrupt ending. Goldcrests are widespread throughout Britain and can be superabundant in their preferred habitat of coniferous woodland. In places they even have multi-storey territories, one above the other in the same tree. Firecrest. The firecrest is much rarer than the goldcrest and is an exciting gem of a bird to find, either as a passage migrant or, better still, as a territorial male. They are as tiny as a goldcrest, but they have a dramatic black-edged white stripe over the eye, giving the face more of a glowering expression. They also have gorgeous bronze-coloured patches on the shoulders. With practice they can be located by their calls, delivered like a goldcrest, but stronger, more dunnock-like. The song is an accelerating sequence of such notes, ending abruptly. In rhythm, it lacks the sing-song quality of a goldcrest and is more like a fast, unfinished yellowhammer. Little bit of bread and no. Firecrests occur regularly as passage migrants, especially on the east and south coasts of England in autumn. They were first found breeding in Britain in 1962 and have since spread to many counties, mostly in southern England. In some years over 100 singing males have been found, in a variety of habitats but mostly in coniferous plantations. Remarkably, up to 46 males have been counted in one wood, at Wendover, Buckinghamshire. Spotted flycatcher. A spotted flycatcher sallying forth to snap its bill around an insect and then returning to a favourite perch is one of summer's many pleasures. In plumage, these are classic dull brown birds, not spotted at all, but with a necklace of delicate streaks across the breast. When perched, they usually sit upright and often look legless. Long wings and a fine but broad bill are additional useful features. Spotted flycatchers call frequently, but their spitting and clicking sounds are easily overlooked. Spotted flycatchers are widespread but quite patchily distributed throughout Britain. They are most likely to be found where there are old overgrown woodlands, riversides, allotments and so on. As summer visitors, they don't arrive until May, giving flies time to hatch out and take to the air. Pied flycatcher. The pied flycatcher is a delightful summer and passage visitor, especially the male with his persil white underparts, black and white wings and little white spot on his forehead. Females and immatures are duller, not so clean below, and with brown, not black, upper parts. They can easily be identified, though, by the white markings, which go down as well as across the wing. Their habit of letting the wings droop below the level of the tail is typical of flycatchers. Their calls include swink, like a wet chaffinch. The song is sweet and fluent, with a bouncing rhythm often recalling the see-chew of a coal tit. A typical burst might go sink-loo, sink-loo, sink, 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 sink. Pied flycatchers are found in mature deciduous woodlands, especially the lush oak woods of the Welsh valleys, but also in the Lake District, the Pennines and parts of Scotland and the southwest. They have recently proliferated with the help of nest boxes and are now coming into parks and even gardens. They occur frequently as passage migrants, especially on the east coast, where their presence is often regarded as a sign that rarities could be about.